Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Investment. Members, you would recognize, if you saw your email and the printed matters in front of you, the reports from, or the additional information that we had sought of the Ministry of Tourism, / Ministry of Health, and the ODPEM. It's quite a bit of material, so I'm sure that at the next meeting, once you have read it, we can have a discussion on it and decide if we need to call back any of the ministries or departments and agencies that we had asked additional questions of. Also, there's an outstanding matter from the Ministry of Transport. When they last came to the PAC, we had asked some questions of them, some additional information of them that should have been sent to us. Let me remind members that the JUTC, Ministry of Transport, came to the PAAC the 21st of April. Up to now, those additional information has not been sent to us. Just yesterday, a letter was sent to the clerk from the Ministry of Transport, and I will read this letter, this email. Dear Ms. Bailey, in our conversation in May, further to email dated April 30th, 2021, it was indicated that both the JUTC and the Jamaica Ultimate Tire Company had requested an extension for the presentation of the information to the committee. Owing to internal constraints, the expectation was for this to have been communicated formally to your office for the committee to be aware. The delays in our advisory and the submission of the report are regretted, and we endeavor to maintain the efficacy of our reporting obligations. Further to our conversation this morning, the Ministry advises that the substantive information is under active review and consideration and is to be submitted to the committee by Monday, 14th of June, 2021. Grateful for your usual courtesies and consideration. Now, members, we have, I know the clerk has sent quite a bit of reminders to the Ministry of Transport. It was, the questions that were asked of them is really, one, a cost-benefit analysis to be done in relation to the Jamaica Urban Transit Company, a competitive analysis to be done in relation to Jamaica Ultimate Tire Company, and a report on the operations of the Montego Bay Metro Company. Now, as I reminded the committee, is that this meeting was in April, 21st of April, and we had asked them to submit the additional information by May 12th. We're in June now, and we are still nowhere closer. And I wonder, of the information that we have requested of them, how much analysis that is being done by the ministry, why we can't get information. So I'm just highlighting to the committee that this is still outstanding, and I spoke to the minister himself that this is outstanding and it is way overdue. So we'll give them until the 14th of this month, of June, and if not, then we'll then speak to the leader of government business to at least intervene in the lack of information flowing from the ministry. Go ahead, member.
Morning, Chair. I went through the documentation we received in relation to the reports. Mm-hmm. The Ministry of Tourism, I believe we had asked them for a report on the Negril Breakwater project.
Yes.
But I have not seen that. I've seen Hillshire instead. So I think we still need that report.
Right, so we'll remind them of that. What they have sent is the beaches development program, but you're correct. We had asked them to give us an update on the breakwater, the Negril breakwater. Right, so, which we expected to come in these documents, yes. Also, the information on the vaccination of tourism workers also has been provided by them. Sorry? Yes, but just perusing it, the concern that I have with it is that and with the best cash and set cash, is that they are not able to garner sectors out of the information that they have to say that definitely this is the amount of tourism workers that have been, or this is the amount of tourism workers that have benefited from the best or set cash. You know, I was hoping that we could have been able to dissect that information. And I think it is probably a weakness in the system that they probably need to look at in seeing the various sectors that are benefiting from the various government programs. All right?
I was just going to add that I believe when the applications were done, I'm not sure, but maybe an employer or your area of work should have been captured.
Captured on it, yes. With the employer, you can see that they have been able to dissect that into the various.
Right, yeah. but then remember
right.
that not all employers would have.
Right. Exactly, we have not been able to. Yeah. All right. So members, again, welcome, and hope that we will have a productive meeting. Apologies for absence. I've only received an apology from Mr. Franklin Witter. Are there any other apologies? No? All right. Members, no other apologies. Move to item 5. Can I take the minutes as being read?
With just one inclusion, Chair.
Sorry?
With just one inclusion.
So,
at page 7.
We'll take amendments.
Yes. At page 7, the second paragraph that starts, Member Hamilton referred to page 10.
Yeah.
At the end of that sentence, we should include and asked what strategies were being implemented to meet the targets. So my question in relation to the target of the metric tonnage was to identify what strategies were implemented.
Okay. All right. Any other amendments? None? Can I move for the confirmation of the minutes?
So moved.
All right. As amended, yes. And Member Davis seconded. All right. Any matters arising from the minutes? No? Well, we have the reports coming from ODPM. So that is, we have to go through that and then we'll deal with it at the next sitting of the committee. Yes, member.
Was the report forthcoming from the permanent secretary of local government regarding the project manager?
Yes, it is. It's all here.
Okay.
It is all here. Yes. With the request for the ad and everything, yeah. It's all here. Okay. Yes. So as I said, members will have to take some time and go through. It is quite, yeah. And just the printing is also one that makes it hard to read because in this document it is done front and back, but in a way that is hard
upside
to,
down,
yeah, upside down. All right. Thank you, members. So we move on to new minutes. Can we invite the ministry in, please? welcome Ministry of Agriculture and agencies, Permanent Secretary. Welcome to the PAAC. As the communication that you got from the committee is that we were inviting, or we have invited your ministry to report basically on the effects of the COVID pandemic on the agricultural sector and the plans that the ministry has in reviving such sector. So we will start off by having you do your opening remarks, and if there are any other members on your team that will do opening remarks, we allow them, and then we'll have the members then ask questions on your report and on your opening remarks. So, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Warm welcome to members of the PAAC. And the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries pleased to appear as requested to update the members on the measures taken and continue to be taken to address any possible fallout in the agriculture sector from the COVID pandemic. And one might recall that complementing the pandemic at a certain period in time was the impact of some of the climate change matters that dealt with significant floods that impacted the island. This is a continuation of a report which we had sent previously, and so we'll be focusing on the new measures and some of the old measures, but we'll be giving a report that is current up to March of 2021. Accordingly, I have with me for support Mr. Peter Thompson, the CEO of RADA, is sitting to my immediate left. And to Mr. Thompson's left is Mr. Orville Palmer, a new kid on the block. It's his first time appearing, but he's the new Chief Technical Director in the ministry. One of two technical directors, but he has just joined us. Behind Mr. Palmer is our acting Principal Financial Officer, Ms. Tomlinson, who you probably all know, is off on vacation. And so Mr. Gilbert, Norris Gilbert, is acting on her behalf. And beside Mr. Gilbert, to his right, is Mrs. Georgia Marks Doman, and she's acting for Mr. Coley, who is off as the Principal Director for Planning. And behind me is Ms. Nashima Davis. Is her first time too, similar to all four members who sit to the left of Mr. and behind Mr. Thompson. Ms. Nashima Davis is the technical coordinator in the Office of the Permanent Secretary, as well as the current acting project coordinator for the ACP bridging project. And so as it relates to certain components of the response and how the impact was felt by the projects, she'll be able to support me on that. So with that in mind, Chairman, I don't know if you require any further introductory remarks. I could actually give an introduction to the report, if you so desire, and then we can take it from there. All right, so in financial year 2020 and 2021, COVID-19 pandemic and the GOJ's countermeasures had a profound impact on the agriculture sector. The immediate and ongoing impact really was from the reduction in market demand, especially for local produce and livestock due to the closing down of the tourism or hospitality sector, and other export markets that were impacted as countries closed their borders and restrict movements and things like that. Now, these activities or these issues were further compounded by the adverse weather condition on the agriculture sector. Periods of drought followed by excessive rainfall, one would recall the combined effect of ETA and Zeta. And so the ultimate impact on the country's food security, rural development, and economic growth was felt. Thus, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries really had to review the medium-term trajectory that we had set for ourselves in order to continue to be the driver of production and productivity, of course, especially of agriculture, primary products such as livestock and fisheries. And we had to strengthen the supply chains and continue to focus on value chain development in order to minimize the impact. However, the realities of the pandemic required us revisiting and realigning our programs. And some of these programs require that we review the budgetary allocation to ensure that critical responses were provided to the sector to sustain production. And we try to minimize interruption. And of course, we had to keep the staff going because some of our staff are frontline operators, the RADA, the VSD, the plant quarantine facilities. The ministry revisited the priority policies and its targets in order to implement initiatives geared, because we demonstrated great flexibility in reviewing what we were doing and realigning. Of course, key to the landscape was food security and sustainability, and so this led to a focus on some 7 initiatives under the ministry's agriculture COVID-19 recovery project. This project was funded to the tune of some 1.035 billion. And so we really had to come up with initiatives in order to support the recovery of the sector. Parallel to these 7 initiatives, the ministry continued to adjust the targets of other support initiatives under its key programs. The Agriculture Production and Productivity Program and Food Security Program, and all these were impacted by the COVID-19 and the GOJ countermeasures to COVID-19. A lot of the time, despite the pandemic, the measures that were implemented to prevent the spread were some of the measures that were impacting the sector in a negative way. And so the ministry and its portfolio entities prioritized the resources to build back the agriculture sector and agriculture and fisheries sector in order to be more resilient based on this double whammy that we are faced with. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the context of the report, if I proceed, I draw your attention to the document that would have been circulated and refer you to page 3. And the way the report is laid out, it covers what we consider to be a summary of the responses to the impact of the COVID-19 on the agriculture and fisheries sector. And the headers that we use will guide how you're able to relate to the report and to ask questions. So the contributing factors, the impact, the measures taken are being considered to revive and expand the economic activity during and after the pandemic, as well as what we consider to be the achievements, are the benefits, are the results, and at some point even the very beneficiaries, based on the action that we have taken. And so that is how the report is laid out. For ease of reference, where questions are being asked, perhaps we could be drawn to the particular page, the factor that you are looking at, and the number that matches the particular measure. And so we'll be able to peruse the report and answer the questions accordingly. So if we move quickly to page 3 in terms of what we consider to be contributing factors, a major effect, it would have been the restrictions for imports during the heights of the pandemic, highlighted by the weakness in the nation's food security. Now, the restrictions for imports came out of the whole matter of some of the countermeasures that the government was putting in place. Similarly, other countries from who we would normally be supplied were holding onto their produce, so that Belize, for example, red peas and that sort of thing, they gave notification that they might not be sending any. And so other countries were holding on to what they usually supply. And in addition to that, the activities at the varying ports impacted what was happening. So the impact of that kind of contributing factor would have seen a number of goods and services that were difficult to acquire due to a number of challenges identifying the food, manufacturing, distribution, and supply chain linkages. And the prediction showed that the nation's food security was at serious risk because of the food import was significantly curtailed. And so what was the countermeasure? The ministry is really Jamaica's focal point. At the CARICOM level, they were having meetings to decide as a region how this response is to be executed. And so the Ministry of Agriculture for Jamaica was named as the national focal point for the National Agri-Food Response and Mitigation Plan. This is a plan that was a direct result from the CARICOM COVID-19 Agri-Food Response and Mitigation that was developed by CARICOM member states. And out of that kind of contributing factor impact and measures taken, some of the achievements were that the ministry, in collaboration with MIC, Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, began working on what is considered to be the National Agri-Food Response and Mitigation Plan. And what that saw is some immediate measures that were undertaken to mitigate the impact on the food security issue. And these included the identification and submission of selected commodities and Jamaican companies, companies that have the potential to support the Caribbean region, for example, broilers groups, with a Caribbean broilers, Jamaica broilers, to be able to export chicken and eggs and that sort of thing to the region. And we sought to strengthen our import substitution with production of competitive products, expanding the Irish production program and those programs that target import substitution, and really trying to reduce the reliance on imported feed for livestock and seeds and stuff like that. So when the closure of the tourism sector hit, and the restriction on traveling and gathering and community lockdowns and all of that kind of...
Before you move on to item 2 on the report, where food security is concerned, and reading the report, I said, sometimes out of adversity, comes good. But as a country that has been affected year over year by droughts and different, excessive rainfall, that food security would have been something on the forefront of the Ministry of Agriculture, whichever government is in power at the time. What plans did the Ministry of Agriculture have before the advent of COVID in dealing with the food security? Because I'm sure you'd have already looked at if there was some disruption in imports, the matter of what provisions, what are we planting for our own sustainability? Yeah? Because I don't think that it is COVID that brought that to the attention of the Ministry of Agriculture. So what prior to this, what programs prior to the COVID, and it is now glaring that we are threatening the food security, was the Ministry of Agriculture actually doing?
Very good question, Mr. Chairman. All right. The ministry annually prepares a plan that targets food security, food safety, and the consistent supply of food to the country, value chain development, and these kinds of measures. So within the context of our strategic plan, there are already embedded strategic activities that target that kind of outcome. So when we speak to the food security being threatened here, is an escalation of the potential impact and what is happening. So for example, a part of the government's response countermeasure is food security, but in and of itself, that countermeasure also can create food insecurity. So so the conversation really, even as we emphasize the threatening of food security by the pandemic and bouts of droughts and rainfall, is really to emphasize and to bring out the new challenges that arose out of the COVID pandemic. But we have a plan that specifically and consistently address the matter of food security. And that would be embedded in the matter of the value chain development, lots of programs for value chain development, the production incentive program, which continue to keep farmers' livelihood alive, as well as the resilient component to that, which is built in the climate smart interventions that we are having. One of the projects that seeks to address that is the massive project that is taking place in St. Elizabeth in terms of the irrigation infrastructure, and a lot of the projects within the ministry that are targeted around that kind of resilience. Similarly, the conversation with our supply chains, the companies, the various groups that produce out there, and the relationship between the ministry and the farmers groups, the large companies, the broilers, all of them, is that the food reserve system must be in place adequately to address. And that is why it took quite some time, even though the pandemic was raging, before you started hearing about movement in chicken and that sort of thing, because the companies had huge stocks on hand. Now, the supply chain, in terms of when the hotels were closed, that is why we were able to restrict imports during that period of time, and at the same time be able to feed the nation over an extended period before any consideration.
But you still had farmers that were basically dumping produce at that time too. And I would probably challenge the ministry that the ministry sort of moved a little bit slow out of the blocks. Quite a bit of farmers. I mean, just last week I was in a section of my constituency where a farmer was complaining that she had quite a bit of lettuce on hand. She had to end up dumping it, had to end up laying off staff, and now it is now that RADA is now coming to her, wanting to know how can they help to take off the stocks, take off what she had in the ground. But she had already dumped it, and she has been trying to reach out for help. And you see the stories of many farmers dumping. Yeah? And why I'm raising the issue, Mr. Spence, is that I feel that we always need to have a plan in place, just in case. So if it is that the supply chain is disrupted, where imports are concerned, and we know farmers having a glut of something, at what point do we move now to save that crop? Because many of our farmers are once they lose a crop, they have to now miss out the next cycle to raise some money to catch another cycle. Yeah? That's how they operate. Right? So let us use, for example, now, St. Elizabeth, watermelon. Right? So how and at what point do you step in now to say, yeah, there's a problem with the crop, or are we having to dump? At what point does the Ministry of Agriculture contact manufacturers of juice, of purees, that we take these off of their hands before you're starting to dump? We're seeing it on television just this week at tomatoes, a similar thing. And food security, we tend to use these as buzzwords, but then it's only when we bottom reach the ground that we start putting a plan together. And I'm not saying that the ministry did not have a plan. And this is a period where we didn't expect it to hit us the way that it did. But what is plan A, plan B, plan C? That when we are faced with these challenges, at what point do we implement these plans to save the industry? Right? Because I hear you where what you call where you give the farmers seeds and things to put them back into production incentive. But does it actually, are you getting value out of that money that you spend? One. Because I see you giving production incentive when we have even drought period. So you're giving them seed and fertilizer, but there's no water for them. and we don't get no water. Yeah? Is the Ministry of Agriculture looking at putting in mini dams in areas when we know that there's a drought that is coming eventually? Right? You give out some 1,000 gallon drums with quarter acre of drip irrigation, but there's 10 farmers in a constituency that probably have about 4,000 farmers or more. You understand? So what is the overall plan that next time what caught us won't catch us again?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One must admit that the pandemic, as expressed not only nationally but internationally, was a real phenomenon, very unfamiliar and unprecedented event. The fact is, all the areas that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we have programs in place that basically are, those programs are designed for mitigation and enhanced resilience. Long before the pandemic, we were speaking about the water issues and the responses. Long before the pandemic, we were speaking about the resilience of the sector. We were speaking about the impact of climate change. We're speaking about the food security. We're speaking about food safety. The pandemic, as I said, really just highlighted the issue and exacerbated the problem by especially the reduction in the availability of markets. So for the sector itself, we were on a growth trajectory, significant growth trajectory for the agriculture sector, and then the pandemic hit. We're having year-on-year growth. I can refer you to the previous report where you would have seen that prior to the onset of the pandemic, the sector was on a growth trajectory, recording its highest production in January to March quarter of 2020 of some 195 tons with an overall growth of 10.7% when compared to the similar quarter in 2019. So the plans and the measures that were in place, even outside of what we would consider to be just basic production incentive program, farmers were geared up. We were expanding acreage under production, opening up new lands. Because recall that the complementary programs, the road program, which you are well aware of, Mr. Chairman, opens new area. And behind that, there's a growth in the domestic crop production for things like yams, sweet potato, ackee. And those three that I mentioned are the highest demand within the export, and follows in that order, ackee being first in terms of the manufactured export, followed by yam as #1 domestic crop export, then followed by sweet potato. So the fact is, though, when the pandemic hit, we responded by designing the buyback program. And while we responded at the ministry in terms of action on the ground, because these funds have to be seriously accounted for. And so sometimes the mobilization is not as quick as we would like, but the commitment is there. And even as we speak, we are appealing to the farmers in the sector, because we have announced the buyback program, and it's something that is known, and therefore they should really reach out prior to having the problem. Now, we have operatives out there, and we were able to mitigate, because when we saw the production coming for some areas, we were able to intervene. But at the same time, I do not think that, for every nook and cranny where production is, we would have gotten around to it as quickly as we can. So members here, we are appealing to you, as well as to your operatives out there, that wherever you suspect that the situation is about to arise, that you could contact the ministry, and we will respond, because we have the mechanism in place to respond. Another critical component to the overall plan is, storage is at a cost. Storage facility, storage, and sometimes you invest in storage and you don't necessarily use it, and people are shy to do that. And that is why, as a part of the plan now, we recognize that the critical need for storage is important. And so you will be aware of that. Even some of our our partners out there, other countries have responded. The Moroccan government have come on board with a program to aid Jamaica's recovery by providing cold storage facilities across the island. And while we even have been reviving some of our on-land storage facilities. And so we have about 2 or 3 programs. And even under the incentive program, we are looking at storage facilities. Now, there's something called hibernation of vegetables. And that is something that we are about to apply in order to have cabbage, carrots, and things like that stored for extended period of time. The minister has indicated to the cabinet as well as to the Ministry of Finance that we need to be investing in sometimes if you drive across other countries, you see huge storage facilities that just have reserves. And similar to how we have funds reserved for mitigation purposes within the country, we have to look at how we reserve food. And so the matter of the value chain is important, because what's to convert in a minimal process or partial process or full process in order to have these things in place. And so that has been an area of focus, but a new renewed focus to that area in order to mitigate. So Mr. Chairman, it's not perfect, but I think all in all, we are on the right track and we have responded and we will continue to respond. And so we are imploring the farmers out there from the get-go, when you have the production in the field before it matures, you are to make contact if you figure that there will be a problem. Right now, things are not moving badly as the hospitality sector is opening up. And so we find that the other day we had some problems with locally produced chicken, where a couple of the farmers, the backyard chicken, was thing. So our intervention directed some of the importers in order to map that up. And so an arrangement was put in place. So we're going to continue that sort of interaction, and we implore wherever there's a sense that this situation is developing and we have not identified, because we have identified many, but any that missed us that you are aware of, we are ready to respond.
Okay. Member Service.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to the PS and his team. I have an overall question, Chair. I have gone through the report, maybe not in as much detail as I should, having received it yesterday. But it's an report on impact of the COVID-19. But I'm not seeing in your report where we are coming from or what is the fallout. I'm seeing in numbers. I'm not seeing numbers. I'm not seeing numbers. I've looked through the report. In 1 and 2 instances, it is there. But for the most part, I am not seeing it. I was expecting more numbers than verbiage, you know. So I'm not able, even though I have seen where the ministry is doing a number of things, having done that, I'm not seeing what is the fallout, what is that we couldn't have done. And that sort of handicapped me a bit in terms of to ask some questions as to, based on the gap, now that you have implemented certain things, what are the plans to close the gap, or is it that we're not going to close the gap, but we are going to do X? You know, an alternative. That's what I was looking for the most part. I'm looking at this report, by the way, Chair, so I don't know if I have the wrong report or if there's a newer report, but I got this yesterday.
That is the latest report.
Right. So, looking through it, I'm really sitting here and don't know what question, except I see one question that I will no doubt one area that I really want to ask a few questions on, so I'll wait until you reach there. But overall for me, I am not seeing the sort of impact analysis that I was hoping to see. I see a lot of actions have been taken, fine. I see some recommendations, I see figures of what you are going to do, what you have done, but I am not seeing having done a number of things. We would have resolved the fallout in this particular area, or we have resolved it to a particular extent. The gap is now. And that is what I was really anticipating in order to ask the question. There's a lot of policy issues in the report which I'm grateful for, but I want to see the implementation and the challenges and what actions will be taken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Would you?
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Member. The report seeks to pretty much answer what was requested, but I understand you clearly. That can be subject to another report, because I don't think that this will be our last appearance. If you would like to see an analysis in terms of economic analysis of the impact on the varying sectors and how the countermeasures would have filled those gaps, and we can do that because we have those figures. Yes, in terms of not only the numbers, but in terms of the response that we were able to make, and even the impact of that response, the recovery and the lack thereof, and even where there continues to be fallout. So, I mean, we can do that kind of economic analysis, if you will, and can come back for that. But this gave a presentation on the general situation in terms of the pandemic, the countermeasures, yes, and the intervention, and also what we consider to be the results of some of the countermeasures in order to keep the resilience and keep the sector going to prevent further fallout.
Member?
Chair, then it come back to us. Apparently, I was of a view that impact analysis would have captured all of what the PS said. So it's apparently we have different expectation when it comes down to certain things. I never knew that we were chair to ask for variance analysis and economical analysis. I thought when we asked for impact analysis, it would have captured everything. So I guess it's over to the chair.
Well, what we can do, Mr. Spence, is just that report. Just see it as a request from the committee that you just, as a follow-up report to the meeting, and so that we can then, that we can then go through that and then decide if we bring back the ministry or not. All right? Member Hannah?
Hi, good morning, everybody. P.S., in terms of the analysis that I've looked through in terms of the brief, you say that, let's move ahead. Let's move over a little bit. You say that agriculture employs about 17% of our population. When I look at your production incentive, do you think this is adequate? In other words, one of the things that has happened as a result of the fall-off in tourism and the closure of the tourism market is that many of those tourism workers are at home. And so many of them have resorted to cash crops, the regular crops that you would say, lettuce, tomato, cabbage, and all of them have gone into it. And what they've realized, chickens too, most of them have recognized that it is when they're about to reap the crop, the inputs that go into it, the fertilizer, the seeds, etc., and the cost of those inputs and transportation to get it to the market are high. And I want to know whether or not, one, you believe the production incentive in terms of a ratio was enough, because you are seeing the price fluctuations. So in Christmas, tomato was about $400 a pound. It is now about $40 a pound. So in addition to the ratio, if it's enough in your mind, how do you also justify to farmers at this point that they can get, one, a consistent price to themselves according to the policies that you have? And if the production incentive is not enough, how do you regulate those costs in terms of giving it to a farmer so that their inputs can be subsidized efficiently, that they can also reap a benefit coming out of their experience?
Thank you very much. The amount of production incentive that is provided will never be enough to satisfy the demand of the sector. The intervention, therefore, is to identify some critical needs and to try to address those through the production incentive program, as well as to provide an avenue to stimulate renewed interest. So, for example, targeting youth and women. The fallout in the hospitality sector is one such area that we would have recognized that brought in a lot of young persons, youth and women, into the agriculture space. Some of the production that they actually executed was based on support from the incentive program. The complementarity that I indicated earlier on in terms of our dialogue with the various input suppliers and all of that is to continue to coordinate so that some of the benefits, recall that the minister made a presentation to the parliament and indicated the amount of companies that would have come on board to aid the recovery by making contribution. So in addition to what we were doing in the incentive program, that was further buttressed by some of the fertilizer companies, some of the broiler producing companies, some of the input suppliers that we got to give favorable discount.
No, I hear you, Pierce, but let's not stray from the instant question. And let me go to it. So the production incentive that you had was about 140 million, and that was for crops. Then you had a livestock incentive program for 25 million. And I'm just asking you, you've said already that that is not enough. I know that many of the fertilizer companies, those are imported products, so the prices themselves and the commodity prices have also moved. So what you have is you have an imbalance in this situation. And it's not an indictment. I mean, all of us want to see the best for agriculture. But when setting the policy, and we're going through the motions now for the resumption of the market, assuming that tourism will open in the way that we want it to open, I want you to go back to the questions I was asking. If you are recalibrating your budgets now to the farmers that are out there to even get a more robust production and yield, are you going to recalibrate this? Can you do it again? That's the first. So let's go there. Okay. Since you've already accepted that it's not enough. And if it's not enough, how would you recalibrate it to make sure that those farmers are able to bolster the yield? And also, are you going to, since you said that the restrictions on imports, are you now going to move those? And I can go into freight prices and all kinds of things, because we know that the prices are high, right? But just answer those two, because I think we're all here to try and solve the issues, not only on food security, but making sure that people can afford the food.
And added to that, just the cost of input that has increased at least 5 times for this year already. Fertilizer price, chemical prices, and your production incentive has not really moved with the price increases.
All right. So first and foremost, the matter of recalibrating what we are allocating, that is a constant response in terms of review and trying to address where the need arises. The recent announcement in terms of the increase in those inputs saw us immediately calling in those suppliers the fertilizer companies, the chemical companies. These are the significant imported items that, you know, drive the costs of production. And while we look at the mix of what we have available to perhaps address some amount of subsidy, that's not sustainable, because the reach would be minimal in terms of trying to leverage those particular ingredients and inputs into the sector. Notwithstanding, we have gotten support before, and well, this is not an announcement, just to indicate within the context of the answer to the question that more of that support is coming. So for example, we had gotten a significant amount of fertilizer from Morocco to buttress local supplies. Some of that will be coming in again. And some other chemical and other such critical inputs. But through the program, we continue to look at how we can, some of those very expensive input, in order to stabilize the prices. But the best stabilization of prices is really increased production. And so even while we're looking at the inputs, once you have the produce in volume, we have done what is called a cost of production analysis. And so we have a recommended price at which every single vegetable or product commodity that is grown out there, we have a range in which the farmers can make money. A lot of the time when you see these prices, it is way beyond what we have as a recommended price based on the analysis that is done. And so, yeah, so it is really a supply most of the time and demand situation, even with the increase in the cost of the inputs. Even with the increase in the cost of the inputs. That's why recently when the pig farmers, or when there was a mistake in the media about pig prices expected to go up by 80%, we were able to say no, because we have those analyses. And so it involves a strategy of constant dialogue. We continue to review in order to balance and stabilize. One of the critical interests that we have as a ministry, you know, is to ensure that the consumer gets the product at a fair, a reasonable price, and a price at which the producer is still able to make a profit. And so it's not easy, but we continue to review. And, you know, the recommendation, the question implies a recommendation which we'll take on board, although we have indicated that we constantly review. But for the immediate situation here, we look back at what is here within the context of those areas that you have indicated. So, thanks, member, and I will commit to doing that.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pierce, well, just need your help in my better understanding. In the agricultural sector, the fallout we're looking at is mainly our production capacity having been reduced from the reduced demand. And in great part, I think it's from the tourism industry that consume most of the agricultural product that would have been affected. So you have farmers who would have lost, well, Chairman mentioned some of them who have dumped products because of no demand for them from the closure. And then you have, so they would have lost what they produce, and then they would have lost the opportunity to sell new production going forward. So they would have been affected by the loss of income there. Those producers who can't earn because the demand is not there for them to. With the production incentive program that is being instituted, I know in quote-unquote normal times, when the ministry have incentive programs for small farmers to produce chicken and pigs and so forth as a means of economic enablement for those who are not necessarily suppliers into the tourism industry, but for the general population. This situation now is different, where you have persons who are regular farmers, suppliers to the tourism sector, being negatively affected. Was or is the incentive program being instituted under this recovery? Was it targeted to assist any of those farmers who have suffered by a loss of income from not being able to produce, to supply to the tourism sector, or is it the traditional set of people who we target? As MP, I would get funds, for example, small as it is, for such activities. So just clarify for me which group was targeted in this production incentive program that the minister have been embarking on that in the report. And the second question, for the restrictions that you mentioned earlier on importations, could you give us a sense of those products that you have restricted from importation from back then to now? And probably it's early, whether there's an intention to keep those on indefinitely or what. But particularly, what are those items that make up that restriction list that you mentioned of earlier?
Thank you very much, Member, for that question. So to begin with their first question first. The suppliers to the hotel and hospitality sector, restaurants and what have you, constitutes some large farmers, some technical farmers, and a clustering, for example, in the agri-park of smaller farmers. And some of the very smaller farmers that are out there that produce for the sector actually go through somebody that would come and purchase across the island on behalf of the hotels. So they don't go directly. The first thing that we did within the context of the buyback is targeted those same persons who would go and purchase from the clusters of small farmers. They were a part of they were a group among the group of purveyors that we engage in order to ensure that the small farmers, and the small farmers produce regardless of what we say, the majority. So some of those same purveyors who went about purchasing for the hospitality sector were the ones that purchase. We engage them, they purchase, and they were the ones that were setting up the distribution chains to the communities and to the agri-markets that we set up in order to keep the produce moving, especially under the restrictions. Remember, communities were closed down and we were shipping food into those communities. And so what you find is that despite the fallout, some of those produce that were used to go typically into the hotel were now being distributed slowly but consistently throughout the system based on the strategies we employ. Just to highlight a simple comment is that when we put the packages together, we will put in things like zucchini and those things that the average customer is not used to. But when we package it and give a price, they package it and give a price like for a food bag, $1,000. It would have been some of those products, and some of the customers would complain. What do we do with this? Because they're not used to it. But that is how some of the technical producers, those that have greenhouse, and some of the large producers were able to move some of that produce. So we targeted also the large and technical producers. Some of them had to cut back on their production. So we have persons who were producing all the melons and the pineapples and things like that for the hospitality sector. They really had to cut back. Now the operation, a lot of them execute greenhouse operations, so it's easy to get up and go and easy to make adjustments. The dialogue with those was that we were converting now some of these into juices, now rather have facilities across the island. How many of them again, Mr. Thompson? 7. Huh? 7. 7 of them across the island. In addition to that, we engaged some of the large companies like True Juice, and they came up with a formula for between tomato and pineapple with ginger to produce what was called a school juice, something that we're looking at continuing, school juice, SKOOL juice, to go into the schools to support the school feeding program. So that is geared up there and queued up waiting to go, but they continue to support the program by continuing to take in preparation for when school reopens, and the pineapples and the tomato and to produce that juice and store. So across the RADA processing units, a lot of puree now exists that will be going out there. Now the restriction that so we targeted a complement of people with varying strategies. And I must say that the new channels and market opportunities that have opened up are breathing new life and new opportunity within the sector, interestingly. In terms of the specific products that were restricted, one of the famous one would have been protein, and specifically bucks and things like that. Similarly, some of the fish products were looked at, because you recall that when the restriction came into place, some of the fishermen were talking about having product and it not moving. And in addition to that, the matter of protein and its supply to the country became an issue. So some of it, some of these commodities restricted themselves by virtue of measures that were being taken in other places. And so complementing that was the encouragement to consume local, to eat what we grow and consume what we grow. So the substitution was pushed, while we continue to encourage the production of things like the Irish and all those things that we would import, but have no need to import at that point in time because we were up to production, even onions and stuff like that. So we look at this suite of products that we import and what could be substituted. They were substituted, and some of them naturally, by virtue of the chains and the restrictions in other countries and some of the closure of some of the plants, especially some of the meat processing plants in the US and other places from where we get these things. There was that also that impact.
Clarification. Yes, Pierce, I hear you mention about those purveyors as the channel through which you access the producers. But you have any data on those farmers? Because I presume that RADA would have some island-wide inventory of these producers. Because you see, it's one thing to have a policy implementation, and we can point to some actual activities in that area. But the fact that we can point to some doesn't mean that we have been substantially or effectively responding to the challenge there. So I like data. For example, we have 3,000 farmers who supply through purveyors into the tourism sector. Out of the 3,000 farmers, we're able to reach 1,000, 2,000, 2,500. So that can give you an opportunity to better measure the success of the policy intervention, to see if you need to moderate it, in some shape or form. Because we have a tendency to just do things that look like we are busy and doing something, but we're not really effectively resolving the problem because we're not dealing with it in a data-driven way that we can measure the impact. So I would like, PS, even if you don't have that information with you now, but we would love to do that because it's important for a number of reasons. It is important to measure the extent to which those farmers are being affected. And secondly, it provides a channel or a set of data for us to deal with similar situations when they occur in the future, that we can learn from our experiences, that we do better next time. So we're not condemning necessarily at this point what has been done, but out of this experience, it must be a learning one for all of us going forward. And that's what we in this committee, and I think the Parliament would want to be seized of. Right? But lastly, you make a sort of anecdotal reference to the products that were restricted, like chicken, back, and so on, as meeting the quantity. Well, you have the old chicken and the other, because the truth be told, the chicken that is used in the tourism sector is not the ones that fill the demand that the chicken back and the chicken foot importation, for the obvious reason of price, right? Many low and medium income persons. You know, Chairman, with your permission, I saw a little meme going around where this young lady going to the supermarket to buy chicken back, and she was afraid to ask the server for chicken back. She said the back of the chicken, you know. But, you know, that's the part that she could afford.
It's the part that she likes.
And I might be the part that she like. But, you know, the reality, as we know, is the income, is the severity of the economic challenges that we face. So, as I said, it's sort of anecdotally referenced the list of items. Again, even if you don't have it here, I would mind you give us a listing. Now, these are the items that have been restricted from importation from such and such a date that the restriction came into being to now. And then we can have a sense of how we go forward. So those, I have some further thing, but later on in the report.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair, before I hand over, I beg for your assistance to the member from Central Manchester, St. James, because I hear his voice in a disruptive and interruptive kind of way.
If I were you, I'd be very cautious in what I say, because he's sitting behind you and not beside you now.
That's why I seek your protection, Chairman.
Chair, before PS answers the question, and I have other questions, but I just wanted to follow up on something that Member Jackson said in relation to the data or the registry of farmers. How accurate is your data as to the number of farmers impacted? And why I ask that is because there are a number of farmers in my constituency that have never seen a RADA extension officer, have never registered with RADA, but they were likewise impacted. How do you capture that data?
Let me respond. All right. Let me respond to Member Jackson first. Yeah. The question is consistent with comments made by a previous member. We have analysis. So, for example, we are able to tell you that intervention that directly impact 8,000 farmers, including livestock, and over 3,500 fishers. We have a comprehensive registry. $18 million worth of goods were donated to X amount of communities and all of that. You know, so it is a matter of putting that information together separately, because, you know, you talk about the countermeasures, you have to explain what happened, what did you do? Because inside here, there's even recommendation that, you see, the ministry has to respond in a comprehensive way to everything. People would be calling when the countermeasures were placed and say that, you know, how do they get to go to market? The big farmers would be calling and say the eagle has not come into their farm to move the produce. So you had to be responding, which is considered very significant, in writing to get the understanding to allow for the haulage, transportation, and distribution and reaping of farm produce to take place, to get adjustment in the disaster risk management orders. At the same time, you are responding to the farmers who are experiencing the fallout because they cannot supply markets by getting purveyors to go to them, putting money into the purveyors' hands in what is properly accounted for, and the quantity of produce that they move from them and redistributed. You know, so there is detailed analysis that can be presented for all of that. Separate and apart from that, for each intervention that is made, the number of persons impacted, the value of that impact, all of that we have. This report is going to be, if we try to capture, a little of everything that was done. So if you turn to page 5, you will see that on the achievements or beneficiaries, you will see that it's outlined there what the counter made. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, this is how the report is presented.
Sorry, Pierce.
So,
just taking from where Member Hamilton brought. How many registered farmers you have in your database that is registered with RADA?
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. We have over 231,000 farmers now registered with ABIS. Since COVID, we have an additional about 7,000 new registration.
All right, so let me ask you now, from the ministry's point of view, how many farmers do you think we have nationally? So this is only 231,000 registered with RADA. Yeah? So what is your assumption of those Jamaicans who are involved in farming but not registered with RADA?
Well, one of the things that have triggered the increase in registration in recent times under COVID is that farmers who would have sustained some level of losses during the COVID.
Is the incentive.
Is the incentive.
No, because why?
Can I?
Yeah.
Our rough estimate for the total amount of farmers is somewhere in the $350,000 region. $350,000.
You're always thinking money, eh?
No. There's a reason why at any point in time you maintain a database of what is considered to be registered, because just like member that left, MP Hannah indicate, people go in and out of agriculture in a very serious way, and you cannot underestimate the impact of in and out. So you maintain a registry, but at any point in time the active engagement might be significantly different.
No,
our estimate of the variation.
Wait, Mr. Spencer, I understand. I hear what you're saying, because we are, I would say, outside of MP Jackson, the rest of us are rural members of parliament. And you have fishers, and you have corn, and you have, you mean the St. Catherine Plains. All right. No, but yeah. So we interact on a daily basis with these farmers. When you give us, there's an incentive package per constituency that needs the input of the member of parliament, I can tell you that most of the times when we are out in the field and are directing farmers for that incentive, I can tell you at least 60 to 70% of the time, they have to go and register to benefit from the incentive. Yeah? So what that is, the process, no, he's saying the process takes time. So even when you put their name down or you recommend them for the incentive, they are not able to get it on in that batch because of the time that it takes for the thing.
But Chair, in addition to that, these are farmers that are not in and out of farming.
No, that's the point I'm making. Yeah? So even though you said 350,000 Jamaicans involved, I think that the figure is way much higher of those who are permanently in farming, but who is not registered with RADA. Yeah? And we see it out there when we go out into our constituencies.
Chair, I must interject again because...
Could I...
Hold on, Mr. Thompson.
For my case particularly, we went out and we sought persons who were in farming. A majority of them, as you said, were not registered with RADA. when I submitted the names to RADA with the hope that RADA would at least go out and register these people or call them in or do whatever is required, up to today's date, nothing has been done. So to today's date, the incentive that was allocated through the Member of Parliament from, in my instance, has still not been utilized.
Mr. Thompson, you were answering that question.
Yes. We have a definition for who is a farmer. And outside of that definition, we also have persons who would have been doing farming and not meeting that definition. We have a portal in ABIS to accommodate those farmers. So, like the little backyard chicken farmer.
No, you know, you're insulting my intelligence now, you know.
Sure.
Hold on, Mr. Sibley. No, because we're not talking about the backyard. Because, I mean, you've been into my constituency.
Yes.
Yes. And that's all that I have in my constituency is farming. Yeah?
Yeah.
But go ahead,
Yes,
Mr. Thompson.
so you have some farmers who would have not met the definition which would qualify them to be a farmer. I think a farmer has at least an acre of land, and no.
Hold on, we ask a question, so he's answering. No, hold on. I'm protecting Mr. Thompson in this instance. We ask him a question. The answer may not that you're hearing. You may not like it, but it is what it is. So go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Yes. So farmers but it's really the value of the enterprise. You could have 2 squares and you have bees on it. You could have half an acre and you have a poultry house with 6,000 birds and so forth. So it's really the value of the enterprise. So those farmers who probably would not have met that criteria, we have a portal in ABIS that we created for them, for those smaller farmers, and they get a temporary registration, and they can graduate into bigger thing as they grow. So we have that. One of the things, farmers have a responsibility to contact the RADA office. What we have seen is that during the time of natural disasters, that is when we see most of those farmers who would not have registered coming forward. So they have a responsibility. So as members of parliament in the different communities, if you know that the farmer exists and he's not registered, you send him to the RADA office.
But I'm going to tell you, there's a.
But I submitted my list.
Yeah. Which is.
Can I?
Go ahead.
All right. So we recognize the need to expand the registration and to be able to respond. There are the response time in terms of persons indicating and the time they take to get registered, we are not proud of it. It's something that needs to be improved. And the member there would have mentioned. I'll give an indication.
And why does it take such a long time?
Rather we'll have to explain. Recall that we have presented the new face of food. And in the new, let me finish. And in the new face of food, what we are talking about is enhanced technology, and you will see a change in the approach to things like registration. Let me finish.
You know why it's not going to change? You know why it's not going to change?
It's going to change.
Because with the new face of food, you have not had any additional extension officers.
It will change. It will change.
How is it going to change?
In the new face of food, there is the reorganization of RADA, which is to come. Recall that it was presented that RADA will be restructured. And the restructuring indicate that there's need for more extension officers. And in addition to that, a particular approach in RADA is that now there will be a technology system that enables the officer to be able to be tracked, well, not track and trace the officer, but to be able to report at every contact that they have had. That was presented. Separate and apart from that, the agriculture sector is being structured because as we learn, we have to grow. We're going to have what is called production zones. We're going to have agro-parks, and we're going to have agroeconomic parks. Now, one recall Holland. Holland is considered to be agroeconomic zone. You know the agro-parks are distributed, and the agro-parks classification is one that have the kind of inputs and so on, clustering contiguous areas and large investors. The production zone are all the areas that seemingly people are all over the country who you are considering as players in the agriculture sector and not registered, sometimes not recognized. And what we're doing now, we're doing a mapping of all of those. In addition to that, that which is mentioned in terms of the approaching radar, there's something that is there also for the fisher folk, because in the discussion about farmers, we have often ignored them. But you would have heard in the presentation of the new face of food that there's a project underway to enhance the registration of fisher folk. And so what you're going to be seeing coming through as we link the ABIS and the Alex and all of these platforms is an increased turnaround time to the registration of farmers and an increased attention to them wherever they are in the island based on the restructuring of the sector.
One good thing about these committees is that they're recorded so that we can refer back to.
It's a commitment given chairman and a
Can I ask
commitment
my
that is
follow-up
underway
questions, Chair?
right now.
And I'm happy to hear about it. Member Hamilton, you wanted to finish up yours, and then Member Henriquez, and then Sibley's.
I just wanted to find out, because on my list of questions is the fishermen who would have applied for grants during the COVID. Some of them are still yet to receive support in my constituency. So I want to know whether or not they will still be in receipt, or is it that that program has closed entirely? And if they are to be in receipt, when will this support be given? My next question is also in relation to the support that was given via RADA with the input of the members of parliament. Have all those funds been disbursed?
Could you please repeat the last section?
Oh, the funding that was allocated to RADA that had the input of the members of parliament. The minister had allocated some funds per constituency. No, not to the member of parliament, with the input of the member of parliament. I just wanted to find out if those funds have been disbursed fully.
I could not speak. I know things are happening out there, but I could not at this point tell you whether it was liquidated fully.
It was what?
Liquidated. The funds.
But didn't those funds have a timeline on it also?
Yes.
So.
No, I said I don't have a report, no, but I could furnish that for the next meeting.
Well, before.
Yes.
With the other reports,
because
it would be good to know how they have been used.
Yes.
They have been used up.
But
so,
I think we were very much advanced with that.
So from the turn off your mic. From the ministry's side, all the monies have been allocated. Meaning through my PFO, we would have dispatched money to the agencies responsible. Fisheries would have gotten the money to deal with the fisheries matter. RADA would have gotten the money to deal with what was announced. So I hear Mr. Thompson say he's going to check to see how that goes.
And we have also that on the fisher folks.
Yeah,
also.
for fisheries. We are going to run a detailed analysis, but I can hint at you that one of the feedback that I had gotten as an initial feedback was that some of those persons did not qualify because up until the point there was a requirement for registration and some of them did not come in to register. So we can follow up on that, but from the ministry side, all the monies were issued to the varying units to be able to. So the money is still there in fisheries for them to access. The money is still there in RADA if you haven't gotten it yet for you to get.
I never heard the PS. They were issued to the varied.
So the entities, so RADA would have gotten the money that is to go to the MP, and Fisheries, NFA, the National Fisheries Authority, would have gotten the money from the ministry to be able to deal with the fisheries.
Further to that, with your permission, Chair, and I think maybe the question was asked, those fisher folks who are beneficiaries, how were they, how did you identify them?
My understanding is that the members of parliament were involved in identifying, but the fishery have a registry too. So they use their registry, and the members of parliament were involved.
I have a fishing village in my constituency, and I don't hear, well, I wasn't contacted, right? It may be that some of them were contacted by those entities. I will inquire. But as I'm talking about the fishing sector, I was struck.
No, but I don't want you to jump the queue because there's, so I'll bring you in after.
Sure.
Member Henriquez. All right, Member Sibbles, and then Member Jackson.
This is to that one from St. James.
No, man, you're afraid. Remember. Yes, my issue with, I'm glad to be reminded that the RADA is going to be restructured. And I'm hoping that it's not about increasing extension officers alone. I think it really needs a good restructuring, because I'm not sure, based on the feedback that I get from the farmers in my constituency, that it is serving its purpose as it was intended. It's not. And I'm hoping these definitions that we have for farmers, are they in a statute, a law or act or something like that? It's a quick question. I want the answers. Honestly,
it's within the RADA's Act, and it's a combination with the United Nations definition of what a farmer is.
I hope we in the future look to what the Jamaican situation is as to what a farmer is. The PS, you spoke to fertilizer from Morocco. That's what you said.
I was trying to avoid. I say I'm not making any announcement, but in terms of our international partners, and for example, during the pandemic, we got 35 million from FAO to help with the buyback. Consideration for some fertilizer support is underway. I'm not making any announcement, so I wouldn't want to elaborate further on that matter.
PS, my constituency is 90% farmers, you know. Everybody farm, even those that are not under the definition of being a farmer, right?
So they're not farmers, they just grow things.
Right? So, and one of the major complaints, PS, is the cost of fertilizer and what the Ministry of Agriculture is doing about it. So I understand that you do want to preempt any arrangement, but I urge you, PS, that the ministry do something urgently to assist the farmers. And the other part of that, PS, is I know it is going to be the arm that is going to assist is RADA, and everybody's putting them on their hands on them head, because that just might as well we go back to the same position. So I'm asking in the interim, because I know you're going to restructure rather, but we can't wait. So in the interim, when these fertilizer arrangement is made and those other arrangement that is made, that the Ministry of Agriculture look at the process of how these items will be reaching to the farmers and look at it and see if there's anything that needs to be tweaked. Because remember, the end result is that we want to assist our farmers. Our farmers are not being assisted in the way that we intend. Policy, okay, the policy is okay and good. But what happened after the policy? It needs to be operationalized in an efficient manner. And is there any audit? I'm not talking about audit driven by the Auditor General and so on. I'm talking about an agricultural audit as to the effect of the policies, you know? And when that audit is done, is there any action listing or things that is put in place? And how are we informed? How are the farmers informed? Because the farmers don't know what the Ministry of Agriculture is doing. So you have to, in terms of what has gone wrong, so you have to communicate that an audit was done and these are the things. Because there are various farmers groups. Are we sending out officers to inform the farmers groups that this is what has been done, and these are the findings, and these are the actions, and they are supposed to be implemented by a particular time? Those are the sort of things that we need from RADA, the Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you.
Permanent Secretary, you want to answer? Go ahead.
Go ahead first?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll move on.
You know, sometimes it's a difficult task to consistently interpret, you know, sometimes when certain feedback is given. We pride ourselves in having a system in place that engages the farmers. We know the farmers groups. We have meetings with the farmers. If it's not when we're able to do it physically, we have farmer field school. We have many programs. We have many farmers out there who will extol the virtues of the intervention of the ministry and would be able to give you good responses to indicate how they have benefited and what success they have had. We have formed groups, you know, Potato and Onion Producers Association, Bee Farmers Association, all of these associations, so that when we're talking about providing support, we're able to work through these groups. Now, at all times, based on the dynamics and the culture in which we exist, these groups are never representative of the total sum of the people engaged in the pursuit. But for government systems and mechanisms to work, sometimes it's difficult not to work through these structured ways. As a matter of fact, that's the easiest way in which you can even attract international support for programs and projects to help them. We continue to pursue a mechanism of improvement. And so if you say that you're a farming community, I am at pains to understand why we are not having the level of engagement contrary to what you speak. We have to look at it, and we have to have the intervention. And I am committing to you, sir, that we are going to have the intervention, because for you to be speaking this way, it simply means that on the ground it is different from what we are thinking, what is happening. And so, Mr. Thompson,
that's reasonable.
What community and what constituency?
Yeah.
If I may, Chairman, what constituency, what farming community are we talking about?
You're up in North Trelawney. Clarendon, I mean, sorry. Yeah.
all of us are in the same boat. I mean, Northwest Clarendon, we all are 70, 80, 90% agriculture. But,
right.
but I wanted to follow through the point, though, because I believe that the issue is a larger issue that I would like rather to really look at. Because we talk about, sorry, Piers, Chairman, sir. We talk about,
Go ahead.
Sorry, we talk about this issue of farmers needing help. But then rather can't just be a welfare operation that just simply because farmers scream about the price of a bag of fertilizer, but the end product is that the potato price goes up as well. Right? But and I know that there's there are questions and issues in there. But I think that what I get feedback on, which I see out there in the field every day, is that there needs to be a holistic look at how RADA operates with the farmers of all sizes, even the ones you don't say are farmers. But there are people that we have to encounter every day trying to make a living, and they're in the pursuit of some type of producing, growing, or growing livestock or otherwise. But it is a holistic view. How do we, today we want some fertilizer. Why, as my colleague has said, they're hurting because fertilizer price gone up. But then what about seed? What about the market that they have to go in? When I see the young people there and I talk to them about going into agriculture, they want to know about, well, where do I sell my yam? I have to wait for somebody to come grab it. What about the transport? How do we look at these rural communities like Northwest, up in the hills, right on your borders and others too? We'd have to talk about RADA with assistance in relation to not just giving away stuff, but what kind of program or system can be looked at? Because we have, we have access to capital problems. Young people and others can't get access to capital to be able to do what they need to do. We have seed issue, we have fertilizer issue, we have water issue, irrigation, we have a whole host of issues that I urge rather, and I understand we're talking about one specific thing, and my colleague is correct. I just don't want to talk about fertilizer. My message across the RADA that I want to get to is to, when you're doing your restructuring, your reforming or whatever, can we look at the whole thing? What program is in place, not just to give away fertilizer, but what program is in place to say, how do we encourage our farmers to do what they're doing? And I think you mentioned something before about the costing. You know what the input costs are. You look at the selling prices in the market. How do we make sure that this is translated to them? How do we educate them on where they can sell it? Who do they sell it to? Sometimes them grow it and then they only have a little man that come along and then the price different today than it was last week. And I hear a lot of farmers complain about that. What they plant today, 6 months later, 9 months later, 3 months later, the price change again. And there's no way they know how to deal with these problems. So, not to take up any more time, Chairman, and I thank you for the minute, but we really need, I want to hear from RADA. I want to see in this reprogramming of RADA or the regeneration of RADA or the restructuring of RADA, the new face of food, the new face of RADA. I want to hear what the whole picture is. What are we doing for the whole picture? Not just little pieces of it and which little program can be stuck in. And that's another question about marketing to export markets. Marketing is one of the biggest problems I hear screamed at me about up in my area. Where may I go sell it? If I even help a man get another half acre, where is he going to sell it? Who going to buy it? What price him going to get for it? There's no structure to understanding how people are going to survive in this industry. It's plant where you plant and see where you can get and figure out who are going to drive it down there and rent the truck tomorrow. I'm being honest, this is the feedback that we get. Even, Chairman, I want to just make one last point, and I'll leave to illustrate the issue. Even the black tank with the things that's given out by RADA recently with the irrigation. Okay, even that, all right? There are things that happen at RADA, people getting things, and then it's not going through proper channels so that everybody is informed accordingly. And then you have it there too, colleague? All right, then when we give out, we say to a farmer, I'm going to give you a tank, we're going to give you the irrigation, but you have to go build a base. And then you have to transport the tank yourself. So by the time you build a base and transport the tank, it's more money than the tank costs. And then you start getting feedback because they run back to MPs and others saying they can't afford the tank. What you give me it for? So we have lots of issues that when we do things, we have to kind of, it's not a blame, you know, and it's not a criticism. I appreciate the tank project, and I know they have restrictions and conditions from whoever does it. But yes. I'm just asking that when we look at this thing called farming in these rural communities, can we look at the whole picture and say, this is what we can do? Start here. This is where you can access funding. This is how you're going to get seed. This is where the market price is. This is how you're going to give some stabilization to prices. What do we do with transportation? How do we put people in farming and make money? All right. Thank you, sir. Bless you.
You wanted to just follow up? Before you answer, he just wants a follow-up so that you can just answer everything.
Comment, PS, recommendation. I listened to the remark, and almost in a chorus, I heard members saying that and it's something that struck me. Virtually all that were participating in that chorus are new MPs. So I would suggest, I can't say what they have said because I have interaction with the rather person in my constituency. And what used to be the practice in the past is that even when you have a new parish manager, there's a scheduled meeting with the member of parliament, and so there is a channel for direct interaction. So my humble suggestion, particularly for my new colleague, members of parliament, that rather, representing your ministry, PS, you know, post-ACE, schedule those meetings with the members of parliament. Because I hear about the restructuring of RADA and all of that, but we have a saying, there's a proverb that says, while grass grows, has a starve. So until that process is done, you know, life is continuing in these communities and constituencies. And it is imperative that the members of parliament at least have a channel for, even if you're not pleased, but you have somebody to complain from at the authoritative level.
Just wrap up, Member Hamilton, and so that Mr. Thompson can
respond. I appreciate Member Jackson's interjection there and the recommendation. But in my case, I have already done that. I have already met with my parish manager, and nothing has come from it. I am so disappointed.
Is that up to just address the issues?
Yes, Chairman. You see, what we don't want to do is to give the impression as if RADA is a welfare organization, but to ensure that we build the capacities of our farmers out there, educating them on the whole issue of how to operate in the context of climate change, capacity building in terms of marketing, in terms of good agricultural practices and so forth. And we have many groups, hundreds of groups out there that we work with. Yes, you will have the individual farmers in the communities out there which you classified as laggards. They will sit and wait and they don't see anything happen, so they don't come forward. What we want to do is to have these farmers come forward, encourage them to come forward, and let us integrate them into all the programs that we are doing. Because we have many programs out there, both locally and internationally funded programs. And once you qualify as a farmer, we can always assist you in whatever way we can.
Member Clark, you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to ask to either PS or Mr. Thompson. You are at the stage where you will be doing some reshuffling, so to speak, in RADA, right? Reshuffling. I suspect that they're not going to get rid of everybody, so they're going to shuffle them around.
Just let him finish his question, and then the PS can answer him.
And so I'm asking a question. are you thinking of performance-based pay for the officers, the field officers? Kind of sometimes it leave one to wonder if the field officer really reaching those persons that they are paid to reach. Because I suspect, it is my opinion, that if they are going out into the various communities, then they will notice that the farm that they are heading to, there are two other areas that looks like somebody's farming there also, and for them to make queries of what is happening so that you can bring those persons into the registration of being farmers.
Yeah.
For example, Flower Hill, St. James, has one of the largest bame factory. And so 70% of the residents in Flower Hill farms cassava. But what is the record do RADA have as it relates to that situation? Because, Mr. Chairman, I suspect that if it is administered to, or if it is overseen in the way that it should, then you would have them encouraging the situation of expanding on the farms, or to have more persons going into farming cassava, because the market is readily, it is right there.
Right.
So I am asking, the real point is, are you thinking of encouraging the situation by introducing a performance-based situation, and that it be, because 90% of the problem that I think RADA is having, Mr. Chairman, is really administration, who look over the person who is looking over the farmers.
All right. That be answered, Mr. Thompson.
Sir Clark, I know of the Flower Hill situation. We have done some assessment of that factory. We have even gone to the point where we have taken an international group there some time ago, and we are looking at sourcing some funding to expand the factory. But you have to understand that some of these issues that we are having with groups out there is that the group started out very good, and then 2 or 3 family members take control of it and push away the others. So we don't achieve our objectives, and we have seen many of that. So we have to engage some sociologists to go inside some of these groups to ensure that we reconfigure their psyche, to ensure that they work cohesively as a team. And it's a real challenge out there. We have seen that on many occasions. Now, in terms of extension officer to farmers, currently is about 2,300 farmers to one extension officer. And it's very difficult for an extension officer to reach all those farmers. So when the PS mentioned that we need to have more boots on the ground, it's a reality. And we have to, and however, we are infusing some amount of technology to reach the farmers, because right now we're working on a system to encourage farmers to register and then rather go and verify the information using smartphones. So we have that system now being developed and will be tested in short order.
And you should tell them too, say, sometime I'll have midway through the month, them traveling, them gas money finish,
well,
them can't go out on road.
That's a inherent challenge.
And why I say that is because you have consistently, and I'm not talking administration after administration, just RADA has not really gotten the resources where extension services is concerned to adequately service the farmers. So I'm happy to hear that there's going to be some restructuring. There's an additional amount in the budget for this financial year for extension services. So I imagine that that would be part of be used for your expansion of your extension services. But I just want to ask a question though, both yourself and the PS. When you are determining your numbers, meaning growth numbers in the sector itself, it is from the tonnage of produce that has been reaped. How is it that you calculate your numbers?
Yes, from the tonnage reaped from the hectares planted, yeah.
And this is not only from farmers who are registered farmers with RADA.
Well, I assume that we have other farmers, even though they don't come in, we always encourage them to come in.
You can assume where you get the data?
I'm sorry. Recall, I indicate that we have structured the sector into production zones, the agri-parks and agro-economic zones. The marketing and statistical people in the ministry are the ones that are responsible for ratifying the final figures that are sent to the PIOJ. So that information begins with an assessment of not only the RADA extension officers that are on the ground, come up through the parish managers, but also our data people that are placed in the 14 parishes.
And in the field.
So, right. So that involves visits, and that involves assessment.
Right. So I'm just trying to
and
determine.
accurate collation of yields.
So it is not only farmers who are registered from, but just farmers overall.
No, right.
And what they said.
Right.
And which comes back to.
But Mr. Chairman, I might add. I don't want to engender any controversy, but the fact is, from time to time, we recognize gaps in the information, and we have had to have intervention that send back people right into the field because of our knowledge generally, either Mr. Thompson or myself, of production intervention that we have had and what the impact should be. We're able to identify areas, just as all of you are indicating here, where production is taking place and the visit is not reaching for us to get the data. At all times, I can tell you that I believe there's a 20 to 30% that we are missing in terms of reporting. And it's always on the upside.
All right. So what I'm trying to meaning there's 20% more production than what is being reported. Yeah. All right. So coming back to your report here, because what I'm trying to determine is you on page 3, which is the second section. Because we got there's 2 pages around the back section.
Remember,
the first
one is an appendix.
Right.
Previous report.
Right. So the previous report
is an appendix.
All right. But you spoke about production.
You're going to the previous report?
Well, I want to see it in the previous report, yes. Page 3, just below the summary, performance of agriculture. You're right, continue.
Yes.
All right, page 3, right. So below this table here, all right? So you're speaking about the...
Mr. Chairman, a point of order. I just wanted to pay attention to the time as
Yes.
there's a 1 o'clock meeting
Yeah, man.
here.
We're wrapping up now. Yeah. So you're speaking about the January to March quarter 2020, which you saw the highest production, right? 195,000 tons, right? What are we seeing now that there's an uptick? Because we refer to growth numbers, right? But are we, so you would be comparing last quarter against the previous or previous year's quarter, but are we moving up in production, right? In nominal sums? Because we can get carried away by the numbers by saying, yes, if you compare last quarter to the previous quarter last year, but are we actually growing when you look at quarter to quarter? Are we in that nominal sum, in tonnage, are we producing more or less prior to the pandemic?
Prior to the onset of the pandemic is what is stated here. And I had quoted these figures.
Right, so 195.
There's been a decline in production
Yeah.
since the pandemic.
Right. So,
Right? So we have seen a decline. So look at this overall growth. Up to October to December, look at the table. Right? Up to October to December, negative 7.6%. So following the pandemic, there's been a marginal decline in production. We are just moving back up now, and so I expect that
where are we compared to that
compared to
2020, that January to March quarter? 2020?
Say April, June quarter estimates for domestic production reflect a decline of approximately 6.6% in total
That's
production.
2020.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm talking, we're at 2021 now,
All right. So
which you wouldn't have in this year.
I don't have that. We don't have those figures now. But what I'm telling you, our initial dialogue on it from the analysis is indicating a marginal decline.
And why I raise the issue, PS, is because when you look at even your chart here, 9.8% in the July to September, but your actual production don't necessarily, it's not necessarily that your production is up. And you're comparing the quarter, you're not comparing the previous quarter, but you're comparing to the quarter as of the year before.
Right, because that's how you present the analysis.
You know,
but within the present year, you are talking about, within the present year, you are talking about the quarter by quarter.
Yeah,
that's why
production is actually increasing, but not comparing it to the last quarter, because I might have in the previous year.
Right.
That will give you a true representation in the growth in the sector, but not comparing it to when I had floods last year, same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We do that, Chairman, do that comparison.
I would imagine that.
Yes, we do.
All right. So if we could get in your reports that you're sending to just see the trajectory in the tonnage in production.
What we can do is
which
look
is
at
how you
last
measure.
Quarter to this quarter.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Are there any other questions, members? So you have quite a bit of reporting to do for Mr. Sibley's and the committee.
Can I just clarify? My understanding of what is required for the next appearance is
well, it's before the appearance.
truly impact analysis, especially taking into consideration the economic parameters. That's what I understand. Apart from that, there was a requirement for a list of the specific items.
Items, right, that were
and we know them already. It's just a matter of presenting them officially.
Yeah, what the complete listing were.
Sorry?
What the complete listing were.
Yes.
Of those.
Yes. Would not naturally restrict themselves or restricted based on production.
And maybe for clarification, I think it was mentioned that with the list of farmers that you have, which is 238,000 now.
231.
Well, 231 plus you said there are 7,000 additionally.
No, it's inclusive of the 7,000.
Oh, it's inclusive of the, okay, so 231,000 farmers. I was asking the question, PS, about those farmers that your purveyors were interacting with as the grouping or the channel through which you had the production incentive program administered to, or the target population. What number of these 232 that were dealt with? See, I want to get a picture of, it's what I'm driving at. Because I would believe from a policy standpoint, if you have a fallout in the sector, you want to preserve those people in agriculture throughout the difficult period so that when you resume, they can pick up and go. The worst thing is when they have total wipeout of revenue, their capacity to restock, replant, and all of that diminish, and not only are they not earning or able to revitalize their production thing, but they just wipe out. So I want to know to what extent we are able to assist them. And as I said before, not just to be critical of what happened or what is happening, but to guide us in terms of dealing with similar situations as we go forward.
Accepted, member.
Okay. So, members, there are no other questions or rather. We'll move on to item 8. Any other business? There are no other business. Item 9. I just want to thank Mr. Spence and the team from RADA, and especially the new members for their first visit to the committee. It is not as bad as people say it is, or how Mr. Spence may have painted a picture of the PAAC. We just want better for Ministry of Agriculture and Jamaica. Members, the date of the next meeting would be, we're recommending the Wednesday the 23rd of June, as next week, Wednesday, the Cybercrime Committee is booked for next week, Wednesday. So we would be inviting the Ministry of Industry and Commerce on the 23rd, which is our next meeting. All right? So if there's nothing left to do, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, members.